to our guests of honor. They've come all the way from the west side of the state to be here, drove 5 hours, and I was really glad to hear they followed the storm instead of had been right in the middle of it, because it sure rained. But it rained there last night, so you know, what do you do? So Art, would you like to come up and tell us a little bit about you and introduce Mr. Haney?
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I am from the left side of the state, and it's nice to be here on the right side for a little bit anyway. And just briefly, I'm a news editor with WorldNet Daily. We're known now as WND.com. Some of you may know our news service. I actually was hired just shortly after 9/11. And immediately after I was hired, I got assigned to investigate this group called CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And I wish I had time to tell you some of my adventures with CARE, but I began to realize that these folks whose faces show up on cable TV as the representatives of Muslims, they didn't necessarily sound so moderate as they made themselves out to be. And then it was about 10 years later when counterintelligence contact that I had said, Art, you've got to meet this guy on the phone. I can't tell you his name, can't meet him in person, but I want you to talk to him. We're going to have a three-way call. And so got on the line with this man who was with the Department of Homeland Security, working in Customs and Border Protection. And after listening to him for an hour, I realized we had somebody inside our government who understood the threat that we faced. And I still wasn't able to know what his name was for his protection, but he wanted to write some columns for us for WND because he wanted to get his message out. And so we used a pseudonym, Bruce Phillips. And I'll just tell you just briefly, these articles were very in-depth. They were about the threat that Hamas posed to our nation. They were about some of the passages in the Quran which conflicted with the narrative that we were hearing from our government and also from media. And so after listening to it for an hour with Philip and then seeing these articles that he wrote and produced, I realized that we really had a treasure. We had somebody inside our government who really understood what was going on. So the short of the story is that in the spring of 2015, I talked once again with Philip. I got to know that his name actually was not Bruce Phillips, but Philip Haney. And it turned out that he was going to be retiring at the end of July. And so I said, hey, we've got to get together immediately. I hopped on an overnight flight, went to Washington, D.C., met with Philip, and he had just moved into a new place there. There was no furniture, and so the first thing we did was we went out to the Goodwill. We bought some chairs, and we sat down, and he had these binders full of firsthand original documentation of his years at DHS, going back to the beginning of DHS, and you're going to hear more about this. And some of you already may know the story. Have any of you read the book, See Something, Say Nothing? Anybody here? Okay. So you're going to hear a remarkable story. What it's going to do is it's going to reinforce a lot of things that you already know. You're going to learn some new things, but in the end, you're going to realize that we have a real problem. We have a real serious problem here. And so I want you to hear straight from the source. And so I'm going to, without further ado, introduce to you my friend Philip. Philip, who was with DHS in Customs and Border Protection, who served for 2 terms at the National Targeting Center, which is the center of intelligence that feeds all the information out to the ports of entry in our country. You're going to hear about a man who 9 times was investigated by his own agency because he simply followed the evidence, connected the dots where they logically led. So, my good friend Philip, my co-author, and a man who has been all around this country for the past 2 months speaking to groups like yours because he really believes that this is a message that our country needs to hear. So a man who has a message, I think, that is really for our time, for such a time as this, Phillip Haney.
Hi, everybody.
Good evening.
It's nice to be here. What is the modern term for watchman on the wall? Whistleblower. It's the same thing. You think watchmen were popular back in their time? Would you stop blowing that shofar? There's nobody over the next hill. Stop sounding the alarm or being an alarmist. Well, let's just say I was on the north side of the wall of the city of the United States and I was sounding the alarm about the Muslim Brotherhood in particular. The one group that I got myself in the most trouble because of. Why would that be? Because this administration formed an overt political alliance with them, not only in the domestic arena vis-a-vis counterterrorism policy, but also in the macro arena, the global arena, the foreign policy arena. And how has that turned out? We're in a real schmozzle, aren't we, over there in the Middle East? A schmozzle is one big messed up situation. I heard Hillary Clinton say last night vis-a-vis Syria, remember what she said? How she was going to solve the problem in Syria? Negotiations. Really? Who are you going to negotiate with, by the way? How has the negotiations gone so far? And a matter of fact, I think we had a truce about, 2-3 weeks ago, negotiated between Kerry and the representative from Russia. Zuhdi Jasser, a friend of mine now, we were on the radio show it was the day of 9/11, and he predicted that the truce would not hold, and he was right. He's from there. He has that insight, and we're common allies in this challenge we face because of one thing, and that is our opposition to Sharia law, which I'll talk about more tonight. So I was working on the Muslim Brotherhood, which got me in an awful lot of trouble. As my friend mentioned, I was investigated 9 times by my own government, not for insubordination or moral failure or refusal to obey an order, but for putting information into the law enforcement database that was considered inconvenient, if you will, or contrary to the prevailing narrative, which is what? What's the prevailing narrative about terrorism? That it has nothing to do with Islam, right? The other group that I picked focused on simply by force of gravity and evidence on hand was called Tablighi Jamaat. It is a group that is part of what is called the Deobandi branch of Islam, like a big tree, branch on a big tree. The Deobandi movement comes out of the subcontinent of India, and it's called that because there's a city in north-central India called Deoband, India. They are Salafi. Would someone like to tell me what Salafi means? Salafi, you have heard occasionally flit by like a butterfly on the media, is presented as meaning radical, but it doesn't mean radical. It means original. To go back to the original, that's what Salafi is. To follow the earlier adherents of Islam, like they did, to the letter. That's Salafi Islam. In other words, to model after Muhammad and what are called the 4 rightly guided caliphs, the 4 subsequent leaders of the Islamic Ummah, meaning community, that started there in Saudi Arabia. And in less than 100 years, went all the way from Saudi Arabia to the borders of China and all the way from Saudi Arabia to the plains of France. Now, how did they do that? By the sword. They conquered country after country in less than 100 years. Now imagine what the news would be like if CNN and Fox News existed during then. Breaking news, Benghazi falls. Breaking news, Tunisia falls. Breaking news, Morocco falls. Breaking news, the armies have crossed the Straits of Gibraltar. Breaking news, they've taken Spain. Breaking news, they're approaching the central plains of France. Every single month, we would hear some news of some battle that would have been on the par with what we see on TV regarding ISIS, except for one difference. Nobody stopped them. But they used the same warfare techniques then as Salafi Muslim as they do now in places like Nigeria and Syria and Iraq and Hamas and Hezbollah and Lashkar-Taiba and people in these fronts and people right here in the United States. Rampant violence. But what was the purpose of that? To establish a caliphate. But what was the purpose of establishing the caliphate, the structure? For what? For Sharia law. That's what it's all about, folks. We hear so much noise and so many terms thrown around. Go through it. Go through that noise in the fog and focus on one thing. As you look at the issue in front of you and the nature of the threat we face, always bring it back to Sharia. Ask yourself, how is this related to ultimately the goal of implementation of Sharia law? That is what it's all about. Thus, when people in Washington like James Clapper, Director of Intelligence, says that the Muslim Brotherhood is a secular organization with no global agenda, do you think that he's actually really thought through what he's saying? And what a fool he must look like to the global Islamic movement when he who is supposed to be a person of an authority, even if he's an authority of an adversarial government, nonetheless, the least you could do is get it right. So not only do they not fear us, but they also have contempt. And when you add those two components psychologically together, it makes a formidably dangerous enemy. If you have no fear, and not only do you have no fear, but you have utter contempt for your adversary, what kind of things are you going to do to that adversary once you corner him? Nothing pleasant, right? And that is why you see 29,400 plus or minus jihad attacks since 9/11, one every 4 hours around the world. Not to mention the regional conflicts in 15 or 20 countries around the world that are going on at the same time, all for the same purpose. There is no such thing as a random ant or act of violence. I said ant because I was an entomologist in my first career. I went to the University of California at Davis for my undergraduate, and then University of California at Riverside for my graduate. And I was a specialist in, believe it or not, ants. Well, what are the qualities of an entomologist? Some of you are in the farm community. You probably bumped into one or two, haven't you? The guys that are out checking the crops, making sure that if you have to spray the apples, you do it at the right time. Well, the qualities of a good entomologist are careful attention to detail. You know the crop and the bug and the good bugs. It's like juggling 3 balls at once without dropping any of them. And also observation of behavior. After all, we're working with living things. The plants are living, the pest bug is living, and the good bugs are living. And they all have behaviors, and they all synchronize and overlap together. Observation of behavior and careful attention to detail. That's counterterrorism. Because people are also obviously living, and they have behavior patterns too. And like in any field, if you observe enough times, you have a fairly good chance of predicting within a reasonable bell curve what might happen going forward. That's called connecting the dots or threat analysis. So as an entomologist that studied ants, I can boil down how I went from being an entomologist to how I became a counterterrorism specialist in one simple allegory. Follow the trail, find the nest. And then push reset button. And so when I said random acts of violence, and I meant to say random acts of violence because Janet Napolitano told us that these are random acts of violence. There's no such thing as a random ant of violence, nor are there any such thing as random acts of violence, because there's a driving gravitational force behind all of it. And I've said it, so what is it? Sharia. That's the strategy. So what's the difference between strategy and tactics? The strategy, here's an example. Tonight, when we're finished, and the bell rings and we all go home, what will your strategy be?
Make it home safe.
Go home safe. 2 or 3 words. Go home safe. Simple, right? But what is complicated about it? What can be complicated about that simple strategy? How you actually do it. How do you get home safe? What does that involve? Which direction do you go? You know. So if we were all here in this same room for 1 month straight, we all sat in exactly the same seats that we're sitting in now, and we all left at exactly the same time, and our cars were all parked, everything's the same, you still wouldn't get home at the same time once during that month. Why? Because it's impossible to duplicate the exact circumstances, because we live in a dynamic world and we ourselves are living creatures. They cannot duplicate actions exactly over and over. But we do have a never-changing strategy, is that get home safe. So that's the same with the global Islamic movement or any other movement. Their strategy is very simple. Implementation of Sharia law. That is based on Quran, chapter 2, verse 190 through 193. That the deen, which means law or religion or faith, of Allah will prevail the arts in the earth. That's it. What is complex about it is the tactical approach. How do you do it? Do you do like the snake under the door and slither in and bite people in the foot? Or you do it like Godzilla, who stomps on buildings and eats trains for lunch, right? Rawr. So while we're distracted by the Godzilla who's eating the trains for lunch, the snakes are slithering under the door and biting us in the foot. That's how it works. Anybody ever here been robbed or nearly robbed when you're on vacation in a foreign country? With the old deal where, hello, I see you're looking for a restaurant. Or, you know, there's a nice tourist place over there. I've got your attention. And you're focused on me while my friend comes from behind you, cuts the strap on your purse, and takes it. So it's a distraction. So we're distracted by Godzilla, so to speak, and that's groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and ISIS, etc., while we're simultaneously being infiltrated by the same group that has exactly the same strategy in mind, but using a different tactic. So if you base a foreign or a domestic counterterrorism policy on tactics that constantly change, are you going to be successful? Not likely. If you exclude deliberately the nature of the strategy that these groups or individuals are driving toward, are you going to be successful? Well, you've diminished your chances significantly. I call it chasing dragonflies. Anybody ever chased dragonflies before? Can you catch them? Pretty darn hard. They're the P-51s of the bug world because they fly with 4 wings. And most insects only fly with 2. And these guys are high-tech. They fly with 4 wings and they have those big old eyes, you know, like the radars in the sky, and they can really maneuver well. And you can chase them around the pond all day with a big bug net, and you'll hardly ever catch them. You watch them from afar, you look like a crazy person chasing them around, swinging the net. Now, will taking your shoes off help you catch them better? Will going through an X-ray machine help you catch them better? Will carrying only 3-ounce bottles on your belt help you catch them better? Nope. However, there is something about dragonflies and their behavior that will help you catch them better. Going back to my original starting point, and that is, dragonflies have certain places that they land. All you need to do is spend a little time observing the environment that you're in, and you will notice that they will land in the same places over and over again. So all you have to do is mark those places and then go and get them. really cuts down on the effort, doesn't it? It saves your resources. And if you can become a professional dragonfly catcher that way by simply observing their behavior. Well, it's the same in counterterrorism. You can chase these guys all over the pond all day and never catch them. But if you know some of the key points of their behavior, you can anticipate what they will do and you can be there waiting for them. But we were told within the intelligence community, there is no overlying strategy and there is no nest, there is no commonality. This is random acts of violence. Doesn't make much sense, does it? Because no living creature is disconnected from a community. Ants are anything but random. Everything they do is within the bubble of the pheromones, they call them in scientific, or pheromones, scent chemicals that keep them plugged into the overall purpose of the colony. They can't survive outside of it. If you take ants and drop them in a little bitty jar, they'll die within hours. They just basically shrivel up like raisins. They have to be within the environment of the colony in order to survive. Another intriguing thing, some of you have heard about fire ants, right? The southern fire ant. Did you know that they're all one colony, all the way from western Texas to clear to North Carolina? It's a super colony. Because they came in one handful of genetic material, one little bitty bunch to New Orleans, and they spread out from there. That's why all fire ants get along with each other, because they're actually all from the same original genetic material. They exclude the other species from their environment because they're omnivorous. They can eat plant, they can eat meat, sugar, anything. Most ants have a more select diet. Fire ants eat everything. So they push the other species out of the environment and take it over, and it's a super colony. Does that sound like something a little bit like what we're looking at? Okay, so willful blindness in America, a national security threat. Is it? What will happen to you if you drive on 90 with no headlights, no seatbelt, careening down the interstate? What's eventually going to happen to you? You're going to crash into something, aren't you? So willful blindness comes from the title that Ted Cruz's hearings on the 28th of June this year that I testified at vis-a-vis the threat of Sharia law, which is the first time in history that anybody in the intelligence community or subject matter experts came and testified before Congress about the nature and threat of Sharia law. So it was historical. So I give Mr. Cruz credit for that, for having the wherewithal. After going to Congress for 50 times in 4 years, that was the first time, I said 50, first time that I spoke in public. All 49 other attempts were secret squirrel meetings behind closed doors, 1, 2, 5, 20, just depending on the audience at the time, showing them PowerPoints like I'm showing now, except classified. And you should have seen the looks on their faces. Those are the kind of looks that only their family sees when there is no camera. They know. They do know. They have been shown. I wish I could tell you, especially in regard to the representatives in Congress and Senate, or House and Senate, that have R's after their name, that they responded promptly. But I have to say, sadly, that they didn't. In fact, they didn't respond when people like me were investigated by our own agencies, and they didn't intercede to help us. Even though people like myself, when we provided information to Congress that then subsequently got us in trouble, they knew it, and still they didn't intervene to help us. I would have ended up sitting next door to Dinesh D'Souza, and nobody would have blinked an eye, not one bit. The only reason I didn't end up next to Dinesh D'Souza or getting fired, losing my job and pension, was because of one word: integrity. What happened with David Petraeus? Why was he thrown under the bus? Because of what he did? So much? Not so much, because this goes on all the time. People trade information. That's the currency of Washington. But what he did was he gave that information to his girlfriend. And somehow that was discovered. And they used that as a way to get him. Because what was his whole premise about Benghazi? Remember? Ansar al-Sharia, a group, means promoters or helpers of Sharia, were responsible for the Benghazi attack. Ansar al-Sharia means promoters of Sharia law. Here we are back to Sharia again. They told you by the name that they chose, their nom de guerre, for that attack, what their intention was, which was to implement Sharia law, both in Libya and to their colleagues in Syria. So they chose the name, Ansar al-Sharia, helpers or promoter of Sharia law. David Petraeus knew that within the first 10 seconds. He creates an intelligence product and gives it to his colleague with the red stripes on the envelope, and you walked it over to him, and within seconds, if not minutes, if no more than an hour, handed it to your colleagues in the White House, and they knew it. And they changed the narrative in real time. To what? What is the narrative that's stuck in our mind? The despicable movie, the video, right? And they maintained that narrative through thick and thin, right up until this very day. What if they had said that it was a group that was backed by the Muslim Brotherhood called Ansar al-Sharia that precipitated that tactical operation in Benghazi in order to send larger caches of weapons to Syria so that they could arm their brethren, meaning specifically members of the Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat al-Nusra, and Al-Qaeda of Iraq, the opposition forces on the ground against Assad? What if they had said that's what they did it for? Then the premise that Al-Qaeda is on the run would have been shattered, wouldn't it have? And instead of saying that Al-Qaeda is on the run and GM is alive, they would have been forced to explain their policy in the Middle East, and possibly Obama would have lost the election, wouldn't he have? But they devised a tactical operation to deceive us, and they did it in broad, open daylight, in real time. You think about it for a minute. You talk about rewriting of history. Usually that happens weeks, months, years later. They're doing it in real time. They're creating a false narrative in real time, in a matter of seconds, if not minutes, no more than hours. And it happened again with the Orlando shootings, when Loretta Lynch attempted to redact the transcripts so that we, poor souls that we are, wouldn't be re-victimized. That was the word that she used. Re-victimized by what? By simply telling what he said? When he made the phone call on 911, being an American citizen, he knew that the best way to get his message recorded and out to the public was to call 911, and that's what he did. And while he was killing people, he was shouting Allahu Akbar and giving his bayah, which means pledge of allegiance, to ISIS. Was he actually submitting to ISIS? No. He was submitting to the concept that ISIS is promoting, which is what? Reestablishment of the caliphate for what? Sharia law. That's the point of it. And those are the infuriating omissions that people like myself who risk our life and career to help inform the American public, that see my own elected officials stand in front of my fellow citizens and deliberately and blatantly, if not lie, then by omission mis or disinform us of what is really going on in these attacks that we keep seeing happen around the country and around the world. I just came from San Bernardino a couple weeks back, and I met for the first time face-to-face with members of the families of people who were killed. And I told them the rest of the story. It's not a very pleasant thing to tell people that are already hurting, well, here's the rest of the story that you have not been told yet. But they wanted to know. And I told them also, I am not going to try to influence you whatsoever. If you choose you want to go forward with this, I will help you in any way I can. I will provide all the information I have to your lawyers. If you choose not to, I certainly would understand, because people are trying to move on. But whatever you choose to do, if you want me to help you, I will. So yes, being willfully blind is a national security threat. Now, did all this start in 9/11? I think we know intuitively that it didn't. I basically answered the question already with the brief walkthrough of history. Imagine the year 632, Muhammad dies. The first rightly guided caliph takes his place and begins a tactical operation to spread Islam through the entire Arabian Peninsula. They took Damascus, then they took Jerusalem, then they took Cairo, but they didn't stop Cairo, Alexandria. They didn't stop there. They went east and west. They went all the way to the Straits of Gibraltar and crossed in 711. And then met Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, the king of the Catholic armies on the plains of in Tours, France. If it had not been for Martel's foresight, there would have been no one to stop them, and they would have gone clear to Scandinavia, because that was the last bastion at the time. Charles Martel, the Battle of Tours, the year 632, exactly, 732, exactly 100 years from the time of the death of Muhammad. So it was a constant onslaught to the east and to the west. The Islamic Empire was the largest empire that ever existed. It was bigger than the Roman, bigger than the Babylonian, bigger than Medo-Persian, bigger than all of them, because it took parts of all of them and combined them into one. When Heraclius, the emperor of the Byzantine armies, saw 30,000 mounted horsemen led by Muhammad in modern-day Saudi Arabia, he withdrew without firing a shot, because he said, and it was recorded in his annals, that he underestimated the zeal of the followers of this new religion. So Muhammad consolidated the entire Arabian Peninsula without ever firing a shot. And so doing, he brought all of the local tribes under his influence, because they figured, this is a strong guy that will protect us. And that's what happened. He drew him into the umbrella of Islam without firing a shot, because they misunderestimated. That's what Bush said, right? Misunderestimated Muslims. So no, it didn't just start in 9/11. And what is the motive? People always ask me, why are they doing this? And initially I did not have a snappy answer for it, because it's not an easy question to answer. But then I was reading the Declaration of Independence, and I came across this phrase here, to alter or abolish it. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. What ends is it talking about?
That's for you.
The ends it is talking about is the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. So when a government that is, by the way, instituted among men, who institutes government? The Lord himself, the Creator. If that's the case, and you believe that, then it is incumbent upon you to be a participant in the government that you are under, if at all possible. That means we are without excuse. We should be and must make a choice. On the simple choice basis is, who is more likely to stand up for the principles of the Constitution? And I mean that literally right now in the choice we're going to be facing in about 3 weeks. Who of the two? Take away everything else, all the flaws and foibles and quirks. Who is more likely to stand up for the principles of the Constitution? After all, we're not electing a church board, are we? This is a constitutional republic. Who is more likely to be standing up for those principles? Who has already demonstrated by past behavior who is more likely to do that? I think it's pretty obvious. But when you're seeking to alter or abolish a form of government and institute something new, it's known as hope and change, isn't it? They're going to change it, alter it, to, what is the word? Fundamentally change the government. That's right, transform, fundamentally transform. Well, there it is right there. They're going to fundamentally alter or abolish it. Now, who is more overtly seeking to abolish it? The global Islamic movement. And why? Again, class? Why? Because Sharia, by its own definition, says that it opposes all human forms of government. Does the U.S. Constitution fall in that category? So thus we're not immune to the forces of the global Islamic movement, even though we have a noble document called the U.S. Constitution and a companion document called the Declaration of Independence. They don't see them as noble. They see them as obstructions to the implementation of Sharia law. And that word, obstruction, has a meaning in Arabic, in the Quran. It's called fitna. Fitna. Fitna is to invoke anything that opposes the advance of the implementation of Sharia law. Fitna, my friends, is a capital offense. And the way they carry out this capital offense is through what I call operative verbs that are embedded throughout the Quran. One of those operative verbs you're very familiar with. You can guess what it is, right? Jihad. Jihad is one of the tactics used to promote Sharia law, but jihad occurs 40 times in the Quran. There are two other verbs that are dimensions more violent than jihad that occur 4 times more frequently. One of them is courage, which means to dispossess violently. Remember the sign you just saw, to drive them into the sea? The term drive them into is courage. It's from the Quran. So they're not just making up a phrase that they like. It's actually derived from a Quranic concept, which is to push opposition away from you, eliminate them. The other verb is qatl, which means slaughter. It also occurs 4 times more frequently in the Quran than jihad. So those are the operative verbs that are authorized by the Quran for the sake of implementation of Sharia law. And North America is not immune from it. I say North America, I'm including Canada, but I'm also using the phrase that they use, and which we'll see in a few minutes, where I'm getting this term, why I call it North America. So they're seeking to alter or abolish it. Who would that be? Well, this page here, how many people have heard of the explanatory memorandum? Yes, the document which is the strategic and tactical document of who? They tell you. The general strategic, remember I told you strategy, not tactical, strategy. The general strategic goal of the group was approved by the Shura Council, that's the leadership group, in North America, and the organizational conference in the year, 1987, is the enablement of Islam in North America. There's where I get the term. Meaning establish an effective and stable Islamic movement led by the Muslim Brotherhood. Led by who? They say so. Which adopts Muslims' causes domestically and globally. Are we seeing that now? Domestically and globally. I already pointed out the Middle East is driven by the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS is a son of, if you will, the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. Domestically and globally, in which works to expand the observant Muslim base and unifying and directing Muslims' efforts. This phrase here, observant Muslim base, can be translated the base of observant Muslims. It also means to be obedient. Well, it doesn't sound so bad in English unless you know what it actually says in Arabic, which is right here. What it says in Arabic is Al-Qaeda, Al-Muslimina, Al-Mutsima. You've heard the word before, haven't you? Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is not essentially an organization. Al-Qaeda is a concept. Yes, there are some organizations with the name Al-Qaeda in it. But Al-Qaeda, as it really is true original meaning, is a base. The observant Muslim base. And that goes right into what they call civilizational jihad or settlement jihad. And what we're seeing now right in front of us in real life. I just got a call from a guy today in Bloomington, Indiana. They're going to try to bring new immigrants right into this town in the middle of Indiana with no input from the community whatsoever. They are going to force them to take these people for the sake of diversity. We know better than you, and we're going to bring them in, and we don't care what you think. Is that representation? By the consent of the governed? What were the 2 wars that were fought here in America fought on? What was the basis for them? What was the first one? Taxation without representation. What was the second one? States' rights. The states had a right not to have slavery too, versus the states that wanted to have slavery. And if it had been up to the South, they would have pushed slavery right into every northern states. It was about states' rights with a particular emphasis on slavery in this case. What are the two arenas that this current administration is intruding into and most actively? Taxation without representation. It's called Obamacare, for example. And overriding wishes of the states. The judiciary, meaning this Department of Justice, is overriding. Sheriff Arpaia, what is he in trouble for right now? Attempting to maintain and implement immigration law because it contradicts this administration's policy. Department of Justice is suing him for it. So this observant Muslim base is a concept, Al-Qaeda, Al-Muslimina, Al-Muslima, that was crystallized in 1987 by the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. When was Osama bin Laden's fatwa of perpetual jihad issued against the West? Anybody recall? 1998. That's 10 years after the concept of the observant Muslim base was crystallized by the Muslim Brotherhood, and it happened right here in North America. The man who wrote this document, as the assigned scribe or secretary of the group, is named Mohammed Akram Adluni. He's still alive, he's my age, and he's raising money for Hamas, just like he did here, but this time in Europe and in the Far East. This whole gravitational force is still going on to this very day. And they have achieved much more, I suspect, than they probably ever imagined they would, because this is the organization that our current administration formed an alliance with. And this immigration policy, for whatever reasons they have on their political worldview, plays right into the hands of this strategic and tactical document, doesn't it? And as these immigrants come in, which by the way range anywhere from 55 to 65% Sharia compliant, they will become the observant Muslim base in North America. And they will drive forward, pushing and influencing like the force of gravity or water itself, to find every crack and crevice that they can come into. And just like water, they will go under it, over it, around it, or through it. Water will always prevail, just like the Columbia River. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be able to go back in time and watch that river cut its way through that channel? What it must have been like to see that river from bank to bank. It must have been awesome. And imagine what would have happened when it collided with the Pacific Ocean. The whole Puget Sound area, clear down to Portland, was some gigantic roiling flood. It had to be incredible. And you know it happened because you can see the eroded cliffs on either side as you drive up 90 and such. That river has been side to side at times, flowing through that valley. No one alive to any generation that we know of has ever seen that river in its full force. But we can tell by the evidence of geology that it did happen. So this is a gravitational force too, and now it's come to North America. We're not exempt from it, and that's the problem that our country has had, is that we always thought we were, didn't we? Exempt from it or immune from it, because our countrymen were sensible and they stood up for the values that America was founded on, and this kind of thing could never happen, could it? Who was it that said freedom is only a generation away? He knew, didn't he? So, have you ever seen this icon before? Anyone? Or some similar? We're at the National Targeting Center, the Secret Squirrel headquarters of DHS there in Washington, and our supervisor is just, I say our because you're all on the team now, to give an analysis of this icon within 20 minutes and tell them whether this represents a threat to America or not. So let's look at it. What do we see? What's going on with this icon? We see a book. What kind of book is that? probably a Quran, right? How do we know for sure it is? Yeah, that's one indicator, isn't it? That's what you call a clue. What about the two swords? What do they indicate? Promotion of Sharia law externally and enforcement of Sharia law internally. All it represents is that they have the authorization, if necessary, up to and including lethal force, capital punishment, to impose and enforce Sharia law. It doesn't actually mean jihad because that's a tactic. You could say these represent tactics that are authorized by the Quran to achieve this goal that's represented in the icon. And what about the earth itself? You notice any exclusion zones there in North America as it flies by right there? Was there a red line around it? No. So taken at face value without adding political, interpretation, what does that icon tell you? That this is a global strategy, a global goal. What about the words? You think it's important that we know what the words mean, or should we just overlook it and tell our supervisor, now we didn't take time to look into the meaning of the words, like Jay Johnson said to Ted Cruz about my claims before the Senate Oversight Committee. 2 days after I testified, Ted Cruz asked him, have you looked into Mr. Haney's claims? Nah, I haven't looked into him. In fact, I wouldn't recognize him if he walked into the room. That's a lot of hubris when you're talking to the chairman of the Oversight Committee of your own agency. Nah, I haven't even taken time to look into it. Well, that's your job, sir. If Mr. Haney is right, this is a national security concern. The least you could do is look into it. If he's wrong, then your obligation is to discredit him in public. Shut him up once and for all, because he is falsely, he's given a false report. But don't just say, no, I haven't even taken time to look into it. The words right here, that word right there is al-Ikhwan. You notice this little letter here is the same as this little letter here? It's the N, Nun, in Arabic. This symbol here is the symbol of the persecuted church in the world, but it's the same letter. Al-Ikhwan means plural, brothers. And this word over here is al-Muslimun, which means Muslim. It's the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the icon of the Muslim Brotherhood, the very same group I've been talking about all along, that this administration formed an overt alliance with, that James Clapper said had no global agenda and was largely secular. Who are you going to believe? You think these people were misunderstanding their own religion? You have to assume that they're rational in the sense that we understand rational, and that everything that they do is here for a reason, to symbolize what they intend to do or accomplish as a revival movement, to reinstitute the caliphate for the sake of living under what is called the gift to mankind, i.e. Sharia law. And down here, this verb, wa'aidu, means prepare. So what is the natural question? If it says prepare, what's the question? Exactly. Well, they provide it. It's derived from Quran 860, Al-Anfal, the spoils of war. It's the most violent chapter in the entire Quran. It's about plundering the resources of non-believers and taking them captive in warfare. Wa'aidu means prepare to terrify your enemy. This word here, turhibuna, and slaughter them in warfare. Is there anything about that icon that is even remotely moderate or peaceful? Then why is it that our elected leaders and people in positions of authority keep telling us that the Muslim Brotherhood is a peaceful organization with no global intention? What do you call that? Willful blindness. At best. At best. But if you run a stop sign because you didn't know and T-boned somebody, that's willful blindness, right? But what if you do it on purpose? If you know that stop sign is there, you just decide, I'm just going to go barreling through it anyway. After all, I'm very important, and too bad for anybody that gets in my way. That's the attitude of this administration. We've put stop signs out. That was our job, to put the stop signs and the street signs out to help us keep from careening into obstacles and into one another. And they just disregard them. How many here took the oath of office to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic? Right. Thank you, everybody. How many of you that may or may not be active duty feel that your vow is also retired, meaning you're not under the obligation of the vow you took? Everyone feels they're still under obligation, don't you? And the reason for that is because once you do this as a man of or person of integrity and honor, there's one thing that you're never allowed to do again the rest of your life, which is simply do this. So what do you do when you see your own administration and your own hierarchy of management flatly contradicting what they themselves adamantly say their goal is? What do you do? Huh? Well, what do you do when you're active duty inside the agency? That's the whistleblower. By the way, I did not call myself a whistleblower. You know who designates you as a whistleblower? You're going to love this one. The agency that you're part of. Congress called me that. I didn't call myself it. All I did was stand up and take the vow. I'll answer questions after if that was meaning to ask a question. And this is from the Quranic concept of war. I'm very confused. I hope we can help our supervisor how we're going to explain that the religion of peace has an icon like this. How are we going to explain it? And or that the religion of peace has a book called the Quranic concept of war that tells you that whatever the form or type of strategy directed against the enemy, it must, in order to be effective, be capable of striking terhibuna, into the hearts of the enemy. Who is that is talking about? The ones who cause fitna, the ones who oppose the advancement of Islam, i.e. Sharia. Terhibuna is in the Quran. It means to terrify your enemies. That means the word terrorism is in the Quran. That means people who keep telling us that there is no connection between the two, that Islam is a religion of peace, are either what? Misinformed themselves or deliberately lying to us. As I said about the stop sign, the results are the same. Somebody's going to get T-boned. Now, remember when I said that Jay Johnson told Ted Cruz that he'd never looked into my claims and it was just an interesting political discussion about semantics and labels? Well, about a month later, he stood before the 53rd Annual Convention of the Islamic Society of North America. Carpe diem, a call to action. Prepare. And if I could give you the magic computer and the Vulcan mind meld and give you all secret clearance right now, I could give you a down briefing on every one of these people and the derogatory information that we have on them. Not to mention the organizations that they're all affiliated with. So, why would the Secretary of Homeland Security, who insists he didn't even look into my claims, instead go stand before one of the groups that is known affiliate of Hamas? And I say that plainly and simple as possible. They are irrefutably proven in the Holy Land Foundation trial, November of 2008, to be tied to Hamas. That means the Secretary of Homeland Security is standing shoulder to shoulder with terrorist group in broad daylight in front of the American people, and we're letting them get away with it. They're doing it right in front of us. These are not the droids you're looking for. And not to be outdone, by the way, President Obama appeared last year and spoke to them. These groups, ISNA, CARE, Islamic Society of this, that, and the other, have gone to at least 150 meetings in the White House that I documented during the course of my active duty career, because that's the kind of thing that I did. I told you I was an entomologist, right? Entomologists are the founding members of the Nerds Club, right? What do nerds do? Write everything down, right? Well, that's what I did for a living before I became a counterterrorism specialist. I was a field research entomologist, the guy with the clipboard. that was always writing everything down. And that's what I did in my new job too. I wrote everything down and I kept it. I also, at the advice of my dad, during high school, took shorthand. I'll tell you how much of a nerd I was. There were 17 girls in the class and me, and I never went out on a date with any of them. But I sure did learn shorthand. And I'm talking right now somewhere between 110 and 120 words a minute, because that's one of the things you learn when you do shorthand, is how fast are you writing it. I was up to 110 in high school when I was, really on top of it. I can't do it that fast now, but I can do it well fast enough to keep up with people's conversations, and I did it quite often. That's how I documented a lot of the stuff that wasn't recorded. I was sitting there writing in shorthand.
Is that Con?
Yes, that is. That's Con right there. I'm going to talk to you about him in just a second or two. I'm glad you brought that up. She's on the team for sure. Good eye. That's what you see. You're analyzing what we see right in front of us.
Shut up.
I forgot what I was telling you about the shorthand and stuff. I brought it up for a reason. Oh, I write everything. Founding member of the Nerd Society. I write everything down. I kept track of it all. And some of the letters are in the book. I know I don't blame anyone for being psychologically finding it difficult to believe that what I'm telling you is really true. So I remedied the situation. In the back of the book, I put the actual letters, a bunch of them, that you will realize when you read them that I didn't overstate anything. If anything, I understate. I learned that from being a scientist. My approach is to always understate. I never overstate, nor do I exaggerate, and definitely don't lie. I wouldn't have survived being investigated by my own administration if I was prone to any of those traits. I would have self-destructed. I would have blurted something out along the way and they would have got me. I would have violated, provision 2.7 dash whatever, and that would have been the it for me. They would have had me. But I didn't, because I never overstate. In fact, I understate. And I also document everything too. They know it. That's why they haven't made a big thing about my story, because they know that if they challenge it publicly, it's going to get a lot worse real quick. I wish I had a little signboard behind the debate last night. Ask her about Benghazi.
Yeah.
Ask her about Tabligh Jamaat. Come on, ask her, ask her. That's the most frustrating thing about it, my friends. I wanted to wipe that sardonic smile off her face so bad, because I know who she is, and I've seen her up close and personal, and her agency, the Department of State, who wiped this case out of our system that led to San Bernardino and then subsequently Orlando. And I told you already, I met the peoples. Nobody went out there to talk to those people. Not one single person from the administration. But what they did do was rush over and have photo ops with the imams of people like Adams Center in Washington, D.C., all Dulles area Muslim society, with the imam, Majid, who is the leader of the Islamic Society of North America, another known affiliate of Hamas. Everything is upside down and backwards. We don't rush to comfort the American people. Another thing, remember the list of 8,000 people on the ISIS hit list? A lot of them are my friends. They're calling me up, Haney, I'm on the list. I don't even know if I'm on the list. Probably not, because I was so secret squirrel and underground, they probably don't know about me. They probably do now, but then when they made the list, probably not. So one of them called me from Florida. I said, would you do me a favor? Give me the FBI number, the officer's agent's name that called you. Okay. 10 minutes later, he called back. I talked to him. He said, it's okay if you want to call him. So I did. I said, I wanted to talk to you about the list. First thing he said was, well, Mr. Haney, I really can't help you because I only have the names of the lists in my jurisdiction. That's all. I don't even have the list. I just have the names in my jurisdiction. I told him, you know what? That's the problem right there. You have chopped this case up into such little parts that nobody in the agency knows what the other person is doing. Not only that, I haven't heard anybody in the administration from Department of Homeland Security call all 8,000 of those people and say, we're going to form a task force. We're going to provide you extra protection. We're going to let everybody that's on the list know who else is on the list and make sure you're networking. So if you over there see something that might concern your friend over here, you can report it to us in this easy 800 number and we'll help you protect yourself from the threat of ISIS. Anything like that? Nothing. Total silence. That's what the Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be doing. Not forming alliances with groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and having photo ops and speaking sessions with them. Well, why are they doing it? Because it's a quid pro quo. They've determined the Muslim Brotherhood are the moderate antidote to the violent ISIS without recognizing that ISIS is a derivative of the ideology that was crystallized, if you will, summarized by the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS is a born son of the Muslim Brotherhood. Did you know that the name Hamas in Arabic is the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine? Did you know that? Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood on the ground in Palestine. Al-Qaeda is Muslim Brotherhood. I mean the one from Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda is Ayman al-Zawahiri was part of Jama al-Islamiyah, which is the armed force of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, just like the armed force of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine is Hamas. Al-Qaeda, as we knew it, is Muslim Brotherhood. Why is all this important vis-a-vis Jay Johnson appearing before it? Because 6 years ago, a federal judge in Texas reasserted that these groups, CARE, ISNA, NAIT, etc., are still co-conspirators in the Holy Land trial, which takes us back to the HLF again, November of 2008. If you want to mark in your mind the point when our country went that way on counterterrorism, it's November of 2008. Why? Because the Holy Land trial was concluded with 105 indictments of 5 individuals for overt support of Hamas, somewhere between $12 and $60 million. And these groups that we keep hearing about, including most especially CARE, were tied to this network and proven in federal court irrefutably that they're connected to Hamas. So what did the administration do? That was the election month too, 2008. Instead of acting on this irrefutable evidence, they made the decision deliberately, intentionally, not to prosecute them, but to turn around and invite them into positions of authority and influence. And that is when I ran into the stone wall of this administration, so to speak, because they chose to start eliminating the information out of the system. And they responded in 3 ways. Initially, they tried to ignore it. That's passive. We just will pretend like it's not there. The problem is that the counterterrorism specialists like myself did our job correctly, and the information that we put into the system was actually working. It was producing law enforcement-based actions. Well, that's not very convenient when you're bringing those very same individuals into positions of influence and authority in the administration. Something's got to give. So the next level of response went from passive to overt, deliberate and intentional. They started removing the information out of the system. And that's what happened when I call the first great purge. You've maybe heard me talk about in 2009 when the administration ordered me to remove all the linking information out of 820 records on what group? The Muslim Brotherhood. The individuals, the leaders, and the organizations of the entire network I had already put in this system in late 06 and 07. Then here comes the Obama administration. They bring these same individuals into positions of influence, and then they discover, whoops, there's derogatory information on you in the law enforcement database. What are we going to do about that? As I said, first they tried to ignore it. But then these individuals would be sent into secondary for additional questions. And what do you suppose they did as soon as that session was over? They got on the phone and they called their contacts in the executive branch and raised a royal stink. So how do you think the administration responded? Did they back up the law enforcement community? Nope. They backed them up. And then they took the next step forward. Well, we solved the whole problem. Let's just take the information out of the system. That way they will never be sent to secondary to have to deal with these pesky law enforcement officers who keep asking these irritating questions. But that even wasn't enough. The next step that they took was they went after the individuals who put that information in the system in the first place. And they knocked us off one by one. I was about the first one to get hit by it in November of 2009, exactly a year after the Holy Land trial. Meaning, they knew. That's my whole point. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't passive. It was deliberate and intentional. They knew. It's easy to find it. As fast as I could type and push the button, I could show you all the derogatory information on all those individuals and organizations. It's right there. It's not hard to find it if you want to. It's like finding gold right on the top of the ground. It's easy if you know how to look for it. But then they had to maintain plausible deniability, and how are you going to do that? By going after the people who are contradicting the narrative and finding some way to discredit them and push them out of the law enforcement arena. And that's what they did. They knocked us off one by one. I was the first among the first, if not, but I also, by God's grace, was the one that survived the longest. I saw it all. I saw it all come out of my agency, 06, 07, 08, 9, 10. It just got worse and worse. And finally I retired, and I will add the word honorably. And I say that simply because there was no certainty of outcome anywhere along the trajectory of my career that I would survive it. But I did survive it, and I retired July 31st, 2015. That day I went up to Washington, and then Art already told you how we met that Monday. He flew in from here. I picked him up at the Reagan National. He came in to live in my little house that didn't have any furniture and no air conditioning, and off we went on this adventure that we're still on now, a year plus later. We shook hands on the book deal 3 days later. We were writing the book in December. We were starting to put it together when the San Bernardino shootings happened. And it changed the whole structure of the book because it sadly proved the whole premise of the book. The Tablighi Jamaat case was shut down by Hillary Clinton and the State Department and my agency, Department of Homeland Security, Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, we call it CRCL. They came to the National Targeting Center in March of 2012 and said they had concerns about our focus on this group called Tablighi Jamaat. Whenever you hear anybody in the government say they have a concern, you better run for the hills. Anyway, they shut the case down. When I left my tour of duty in June of 2012, I went back to my home port and put the component of that case, the Tablighi Jamaat case, into the system. It was called the Institute of Islamic Education. And that's where the 67 records that some of you may have heard me talk about came from. This time they didn't come in and just modify the records like in the first great purge of 09. This time they came in and took the records completely out of the system. They bypassed protocol, got my Social Security to access my records, and deleted them. So how do I know they did it? Because I tagged my records. Down in the right-hand corner of the record there's an option, 0 or 1. Just like Fortran. I put a 1 on there, which means anytime anybody looked at the record, I got an email back. Why? Because I wanted to stay in communication with my colleagues around the country. That's how you work cases together. TEX is an archive database. It's designed to build one brick on top of the other till boing, the picture comes into view and you've got your case. And you can do things like designate Tablighi Jamaat as a terrorist group. How convenient, however, if you never put the information or you destroy it, they're never held accountable for not designating because they'll just simply say, well, we don't have the evidence that they're a terrorist group. How are you going to get the evidence? Working together within the law enforcement community to build up the evidence and then give it to the State Department so they can make an informed decision. But nope. And so on goes time, and then December 2nd of 2015 comes Syed Farouk and Tashween Malik, the Darul al-Islamiyya Masjid in San Bernardino, and I knew within a split second that it was the case. I sat up, nobody was in the house, and I yelled at the top of my voice at the computer, "That's my case," because I knew it. I just know like you know things. And that set off a sequence of events that led me to go on to Megan and proclaim that it was Tablighi, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Here it is. This is Syed Farouk. I saw a picture of him earlier. That's what he looked when he came back to America. Are those the same two guys? Well, if you're a subject matter expert and a counterterrorism specialist, you might be wanting to ask him, "Mr. Syed, what have you been doing? How come you look like you just stepped off a plane from Pakistan? I thought you were born in Long Island," or something like that. But we're not allowed to ask those questions anymore, because Eric Holder's parting legacy in November of 2014, when he quietly went into the night as Attorney General, was guidelines for federal law enforcement officers. He laid them on the table for us. We're not allowed to build cases based on affiliation with any religious group. So we're blinded and we're handcuffed. See, you can't build a case of probable cause if you're not allowed to make an association between the individual and the group, like in his case is called Tablighi Jamaat. And then the administration says, nobody knew him. He wasn't affiliated with any organizations. He certainly wasn't affiliated with any Islamic group. And he doesn't have any evidence of ties to foreign terrorist groups. Isn't that what they said? I'll give you a homework assignment. I hope you never have to do it. And that is, if we ever have another attack, I want you to do something for me. Wait till the noise wall passes. 2 or 3 days. And then stick on the case and watch it. And you'll find something. It's astonishing. You will find that virtually everything that you were told in the first 2 or 3 days will be wrong, will be false. That actually he was known. That actually he was part of an organization. That actually there were indicators. And that he'd been plotting things, and a lot of signs along the way could have been acted upon to stop him. Did you know that the FBI was tracking him and his accomplice, Enrique Marquez, and that they had attempted several terrorist attacks earlier, but each one of them had failed? And that's why Enrique Marquez is in jail right now. Not because of providing guns per se to Syed Farouk and Tashween Malik. Remember those pipe bombs in your... The question is, who made those? Syed Farouk and Enrique Marquez. So the whole narrative is backwards. Remember the big fiasco with the iPhone? What did they want the iPhone for? Do we even remember why they wanted the iPhone? The list of names. Who did he call? The only public statement that ever came out after they finally got the iPhone was that we don't see any evidence that he was affiliated with a foreign terrorist organization. Okay, that's great. But you didn't finish the sentence. What's the other half of the sentence? Who was he affiliated with? As a matter of fact, he was affiliated with a network that's here. Tablighi Jamaat. So they allow us to make assumptions based on the common meaning of words and leave it there half said, so that we develop a premise in our mind based on statements from individuals that we trust in positions of authority, but they never finish the other half of the sentence. That's disinformation. That's a half-truth, which I learned when I was a kid is the same as a whole lie. Now here's when I went on Megyn Kelly and told her about Tablighi. Even my friends in the intelligence committee said, "Boy, Haney, you really went out on a limb this time." Because even my friends in the intel committee, virtually none of them ever heard of Tablighi. Well, how did you know? I knew because that was my case from NTC. That's what I worked on. That's the case that the government shut down. That's how come I know. Of all the people in all the groups in the whole universe, don't you think it's astonishing that it was that one that they shut down and it was that one that went to San Bernardino? It's astonishing. I call this story preposterously impossible. There's no way anybody could engineer the circumstances of this story. How are we doing on time, by the way?
You got all the time you need.
What'd you say?
It's 8:25.
It's 8:25. I mean, when should I stop? 10 minutes?
Oh, no, you're done.
Okay, we're doing good. Thank you, everybody, for paying attention and hanging in there. This is like a buffet. I don't care how hungry you are. The best Chinese food restaurant in all of Spokane, you can only eat so much at a time. You might want to go back later, but when you get full, you're full. And this subject is like that. You can only take so much at once. But don't forget about the video, and you can have the PowerPoint. Just ask the coordinator. He'll send it to you. And all the URLs and all the information that I derive this from are down in the notes section of each of the PowerPoint slides. So you can find it all. It's not, you don't have to, it's user friendly. It's all there for you. So here's something that happened. Is the most spectacular thing that ever happened in my law enforcement career. It doesn't look like very spectacular, just a bunch of words on paper, huh? But notice the date. A week after, see, December 10th, December 17th. The FBI does something I never saw them do before or since, or even heard of. They published the unredacted transcript of their affidavit with Enrique Marquez and put it on the public media. And there in paragraph 23, it says, during this time, Marquez and Farouk discussed the, what? Tablighi Jamaat. And Marquez began to pray more frequently at Farouk's residence. That, my friend, was a turning point. Why? First of all, my friends in the Intel Committee would say, how in the world did you know? As I said already, I knew because it was the case I worked on at the NTC. But, to put it in point counterpoint, what if I had said that Syed Farouk on national TV, on Fox, was a part of Hamas, or Hezbollah, or you name it, some other group? I would have been wrong on a technicality, wouldn't I? And I would have disqualified myself. And I can guarantee you that the agency would have come out and made a public statement, see, we told you, he's unreliable, he's an Islamophobic, biased, bigoted federal former law enforcement, and this is the reason why we investigate him, because we didn't want officers making these unsubstantiated claims and slandering the peaceful Islamic community. Syed Farouk was just not a part of Hamas. He wasn't part of any foreign terrorist network. In fact, we'll probably never really understand exactly why he did all this, will we? Well, that messed up that narrative, because I said it on record. You realize what a risk it was? I didn't think of it as a risk. Only in retrospect, when I evaluated the consequences of what would have happened if I had been wrong, did I realize what a bold thing it was to go on national TV and contradict the entire administration. No, he's not a lone wolf. People knew him. He was a Hafiz. He'd memorized the Quran. He was sent to Saudi Arabia to marry Tashfeen Malik in an arranged marriage. I knew that Tashfeen wasn't who we think she was because Tashfeen is a boy's name. He was a jihadi in the reconquest of Spain in the 9th century. And I also knew that Malik, the name, came from the Arabian Peninsula. So I knew that there was something wrong with that story. I also knew that if our case had not been shut down, that Syed Farouk would have very likely been denied travel. He would have been put on the no-fly list because of affiliation with this network of derogatory information. organizations, and or his pending fiancée Tashfeen Malik would have been denied a visa and she would have never come here in the first place. Does that mean that he might have not still done the attack? We'll never know, will we? But is it a plausible premise that we could have stopped it? Absolutely. Especially when you factor in the fact, what does this say? They were talking about it, and I told you already why he's in jail for multiple failed plots with Syed Farouk. What does that mean? Multiple, plural. Failed, they didn't happen. Plots, plural. With who? Syed Farouk. When did this all happen? Before he ever went to Saudi Arabia and married Tashfeen Malik. That means the FBI knew about him and never intervened. Just like with Omar Mateen, just like with Nidal Hassan, just like with Rahmani from New York, and so many others. Because they're not allowed to build the associations between the individuals and the organizations. And that creates a gap big enough for what I call a person, a man-sized hole, to walk right through. And they have been doing it. Not only that, but FBI doesn't have reciprocity with DHS, meaning we can't talk to each other directly. And if you follow the story like I suggested you do after the Orlando shooting, the CBP officer down there in Florida, maybe Orlando, I forget which, said we didn't have any DROG on Omar. But what he didn't know is that the FBI had been talking to him 3 times. And what FBI didn't know is that CBP had been talking to him 2 or 3 times. Because they don't have reciprocity, they couldn't share the information back and forth. So we're dead in the water. That would be one of the first things I'd like to try to address if I do have the opportunity to go back and work with Mr. Trump when he becomes president, is fix these gaping holes in the system. That was my specialty. I could help do that. So, and then we just carry on to, this is supposed to be 2016. Bureaucrats edit the facts of Islamic terrorism to fit Obama's narrative. Remember I told you they bumped us off one by one? They started at the pyramid, bumped off the top experts, and then they have an open field. We were the Charles Martels of the intelligence community. We said no, you cannot come any further, but they bumped us off. And that gave them an open arena to come to the point now where they're changing events in real time. And there's nobody in a position of subject matter expertise to stop them, because they came after every one of us and discredited us and ruined our careers. So now they can maintain plausible deniability. So they're editing the facts in real time. And here, this is a really great article, FBI excuse for redacting Orlando shooter ISIS pledges because of an ongoing criminal investigation. And again, this is supposed to be 2016. In other words, this isn't stuff that happened a year ago. This is happening right now. It's broken out into the open arena now, and every single thing that is inconveniently contradictory to the prevailing narrative, they change it in real time. And I mentioned in this article that we pointed it out during the hearings in June of 2016. And people always ask me, are there jihadi training camps in America? And I always say the same thing, yes, they're called mosques.
Right.
And here is another one example, October 5th, 2016. I guess I had 2015 on the brain. And anyway, this Maryland imam praising ISIS beheadings was a Sharia law teacher. And what they're doing is taking these individuals from the mosques and training them in the fine points of conducting jihad for the purpose of what again? Ultimate promotion and implementation of Sharia law. This is Baltimore. It's going on all over the country. Who else is seeking? This is about Rutland. I just told you today that I got a call from Bloomfield, Indiana. These little towns across the country, I call it parachuting. They're bringing immigrants in the dead of night, and they're not telling you anything about them, and they don't care what the people say, they're just bringing them in. This is Rutland lawmakers resisting call to try to block refugees. These guys are elected officials. They have a town hall meeting. People come and express their concerns, and they ignore them. We're going to do it anyway. We don't care what you say. What?
Used to that here.
You're used to that here too. Well, unfortunately, that's the state of our country. Don't take it wrong, because it's not meant to be personal. It's a rhetorical question. Why are you used to it? Why have we become used to it? There's a lot of reasons, right? It's not a simple question, answer. But why have we come to the point where we're accepting it when these are elected officials? I think there's a reason for it. We've outlawed tar and feathering. That's what it is. A couple processions down Main Street, and that would probably alleviate a lot of this mischief, wouldn't it? And then up here, speaking about the vetting of the refugees, basically, Comey from the FBI says we can't vet them. We don't know how to do it. And not to mention ones from Syria, but also Somalia and Iraq and other countries. We can't do it. They said it plainly. And what did Hillary Clinton say last night? What was the word she said? Vigorous vetting, something like that. Thorough vetting, I forget. You know, robust, I hate that word, robust vetting. Yeah, really? When your own officials in the government say that we can't vet them when we don't know how, we don't even know who they are. And then it comes to find out that Hillary Clinton herself, not a week ago, said that it's not possible to vet them. And then last night she stands up and says we'll have a thorough vetting program, falsely implying that there's nothing to worry about. And then we find out not only can we not thoroughly vet them, that we're allowing them to vet themselves. That's the thorough vetting. Again, I don't want you to get stuck on the detail. Just look at the URLs. You guys can check these stories out and read through them. Just don't do it when you're in a good mood, because you won't be in a good mood very long. Okay, aiding and abetting Sharia law. This is one of those condescending articles that implies that anybody in America is worried about Sharia is just a hater and Islamophobe. Really? We can't even address the question without being accused of being a hater and an Islamophobe? That's like saying, do you lock your doors when you go home, when you leave? Is that a discriminatory act to lock your door? Are you being implicitly biased against possible burglars or the homeless or something? You need remedial training. You know, the very fact that you lock your door means that you're discriminating. Really? That's how dumb it is. If we do it with our own homes, how come we don't do it with our country? It's no different. Now, I mentioned I was going to talk about Khan. Here he is. This is Khazir Muslim Khan. Juristic clarification of sources of Islamic law. What is this talking about? Sharia. This is Khan from the DNC. That's why I call it the Khan. He wrote this in '83. All this is about aiding and abetting and minimizing the real gravitational force of Sharia law here in North America, going all the way back to the 1987 explanatory memorandum, which is what, 30 years ago? He is also part of the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, and I'll show you that in a minute. Remember the mistaken granting of citizenship to people, thousands of them? This is the report, guys, right here. This is the IG report. It was a mistake. Now, do you have fingerprints in Washington for your license? You have some form of ID. Is it your eye or something? Whatever it is. If they gave driver's licenses to 315,000 people without each one of the pieces in the process, would that be a mistake? See, there's a lot of numbers in this report that weren't reported in the media. Initially, it was the 800 and something or other that were mistakenly granted citizenship. But it also tells you that they lost the fingerprints of 315,000 people. It also tells you that all those individuals were all criminals and subject to be deported. and that they all created new identities. Who taught them to do that? And the worst part of it is that the people that did this, the subject matter experts in the field that found out these anomalies, created a team and they called it the Janus Project. Why the Janus Project? Exactly. And what does that imply? We don't know who they are. My colleagues that were on this team really picked a good title of their team. Janus is Two-Face. We don't know which face is really them. Will the real immigrant please stand up? So anyway, at the very end of this report, it's reported that in 2016, they shut down the Janus Project. In other words, they found the problem and then they disbanded the team, just like they do with projects that I work on. What do you think the possible consequences of that will be? Here's the picture from the testimony. That's Farhana Kara. She's president of Muslim Advocates. This is Richard Cohen. He's president of Southern Poverty Law Center. She's responsible for the Great Purge of 11 and 12 when they took the training material out of all the federal law enforcements that was considered discriminatory or slanderous against Islam. And he's the one that goes around labeling everybody a hate group. You're probably in it too. Yeah. There you go. Stand, take a bow, you know. You're on his list. Well, here I am in the middle, and I say that only the Lord himself could have arranged to put me in the middle like a piece of bologna in a bologna sandwich, right in between my two most implacable adversaries during the whole time of my career, because they cause untold havoc within federal law enforcement and state and local law enforcement to shut us down and paralyze us so we can't connect the dots and create cases that will lead us to probable cause and help prevent and protect our country from threat. And she said something. She said, I don't know any radical imams. And I called John Zadrozny the next day and I said, you trapped her, you know. He said, what do you mean, Mr. Haney? I said, why you trapped her is because she said she doesn't know any radical imams in America, which means that imams that are promoting Sharia, she doesn't consider to be radical. That means she's subverting the Constitution. And boy, is she subverting the Constitution. She's made it impossible for law enforcement officers to do their job. And then here's DHS Secretary Jay Johnson referring to the stuff I talked to you about in 2009. He doesn't know if officials are scrubbing radical Islam from documents. Really? You're the Secretary of Homeland Security. I've been about as plain as I possibly can. There's no mystery in what I'm telling you. I don't mince words. I'm very direct. I said, this is what they took out: radical Islam, Jihad, and Muslim Brotherhood. And he says, I don't know. Nor do I care. Obviously, because he wouldn't have appeared before ISNA if he had any intention whatsoever of following up on my claims. Can you imagine working for people like that? Can you imagine surviving it?
You went to the same school as Hillary.
I'm not sure. And here's a really good one. Director of National Intelligence, this is James Clapper, my all-time favorite hero. Climate change, but not Sharia, leads to jihad. Now that's brilliant. That's even better than his statement about Muslim Brotherhood, isn't it? This is ridiculous, isn't it? Look how far, this is the geniuses in Washington that are forming our domestic and foreign counterterrorism policy. Total disassociation between the reality and what their narrative is. But I do thank him for one thing, because he made me realize that Muhammad was the first environmentalist. He's fighting jihad to save the planet. 1,400 years he's been fighting against climate change. And here is a culminating slide. There's a thing called continuity of continuity of imagery. You see the icon, the picture in the back? That's the earth, right? Like we saw in the Quran. That says Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America, right? That's the name of the organization. It's a Muslim Brotherhood front group, along with CARE and ISNA. It's called AMJA. This is a copy from their website just to show you that it's a real viable organization. And if we're going to do another analysis for our supervisor, we're going to have to tell him what these words right here mean. And so I will tell you, that says majama, that means group. That says fuqaha, which is plural for law. That says al-Sharia, and that says be'amrikia. Majama fuqaha al-Sharia be'amrikia. The group of lawyers promoting Sharia law in America. That's a whole lot different than the name in English, isn't it? Why is this organization allowed to operate in America? Remember ALAC, American Law for American Courts? Every state that tries to implement is violently opposed by CARE and ACLU, etc., right? If they weren't really intending to implement Sharia law, then why would they oppose it in the first place? And B, if that was the case, then why is this organization even in existence? This, my friends, is the most malevolently dangerous of all of them, because this is the sun of the solar system of the Muslim community in North America. They issue fatwas providing guidance to the observant Muslim base how to navigate their way through a society that is non-Sharia compliant and still stay within the boundaries of compliant Islam. And this is the clock boy. He's now suing Glenn Beck and the Center for Security Policy for slander. Of course, if you see something, say something. But this is what happens to you if you do. That's why I called the book See Something, Say Nothing. It would have been a lot better off for them, I suppose, if they had said nothing. Only on the surface, though. Should they regret doing the right thing? No. That's the second time that Glenn Beck has been sued by somebody for slander, which, by the way, is a capital offense in Sharia. So what can we do? This is the last slide. House Resolution 3892 is called the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Bill. It's in the House. There's a mirror in the Senate now, waiting to be read off the floor. What's keeping them? We could even theoretically pass it before the election, theoretically. And if we were to do it and designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, that would send a signal to the Salafi, pro-Sharia, pro-Jihad, global Islamic movement that America is once again serious about protecting its border without firing a shot or dropping a single bomb. That's what you call walking softly and carrying a big stick. If we don't have the wherewithal to recognize the nature of the threat standing in front of us, how are we ever going to conduct effective tactical operations anywhere else in the world if we're too blind to see the nature of the enemy standing right in front of us? If you were to build a wall around America 90 foot thick and 90 foot high, but keep handcuffing the guardians of the gates, is this going to help us any? Let's start with what we see and work our way out. Then our policies will be effective. And I'll finish up with a quote from Abraham Lincoln, which I always do, and that is his second address to Congress in 1862. That the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. That the occasion is piled high with difficulties, but we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth. So thank you all for listening. And if we'll have questions, right?
Yeah. So I'd like to just break for just a second here. I know there's people here who have some questions for him, and I'd like to get those. I'd like to get those on the video. So if you would, raise your hand, but wait for a microphone so that other people can hear them in the future. And also, these gentlemen drove a long way. They came from Gig Harbor. They've got 3 boxes of books here, and I'd really feel bad if they took all the books home. So, he's here. I would encourage you to support their work. They need that. So, who has a question? I understand it. You don't have to speak. Do whatever you want.
Should I stay on that?
Yeah, you're fine. Unless you're tired.
I'm always tired.
Earlier in your talk, I gained an impression, and I was wanting to ask a question. It sounded like you were implying that there's some people on the Republican side and maybe the House or the Senate that are undermining you. Is that true? And
Sadly.
would you care to name them? Probably not.
Well, start with Mike McCall, chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. who was the one I provided information vis-a-vis the Boston bombing, which ended up getting me investigated by the Department of Justice, and a grand jury convened to find probable cause to put me in jail. And the committee knew that the reason why that information got to them is because they asked me to give it to them, to prove that Janet Napolitano was lying to them. And they never intervened to help me. They let the DOJ investigate me, along with Internal Affairs from Customs and Border Protection and the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, all three all at the same time. They took my gun, they revoked all my access to the system, they canceled my secret clearance, and they sequestered me the last 11 months of my career with no assigned job duties, while I waited for the proverbial knock on the door. And we have some questions for you, Mr. Haney, and never lifted a finger to help me. I talked to him face to face, and I told him, right there, here's the threat. And not just him, a lot of other ones. There are some good ones, though. Charles Grassley helped me, Louis Gohmert, Steve King from Iowa, Trent Franks, Daryl Issa, did I say him already? And a couple other people on the Senate side and some on the House side. They actually signed a letter, which is in the book, asking for the Inspector General to investigate my claims. That was Charles Edwards. He was corrupt. He was resigned in disgrace because he was giving draft copies of his investigations to DHS officials to edit before he turned them in. I ended up getting investigated by the IG, not for the claims that I made, but for the fact that I was putting that information in the system in the first place. So another thing is the countering violent extremism bills that the House Committee keeps introducing onto the floor. Countering violent extremism is a policy based on tactic which will never succeed. They need to recognize the nature of the threat we face. And other people, if you want to go back to 2012, who opposed the 5 House members. It was Michelle Bachmann, Louis Gohmert, Trent Franks, Lynn Westmoreland, and the fellow from Florida, who introduced letters to the 5 IGs saying we have concerns about the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood within our law enforcement community. 5 letters to 5 IGs. What did the Republicans, McCain, Boehner, and Rogers, all with R's after the name, stood up in public and criticized their own colleagues for having the audacity to write those letters? That's an abrogation of constitutional checks and balances. They didn't have the authority to criticize them. They should have just let them give the letters and let the Inspector Generals investigate the information and let them be the one who made the determination. Michelle Bachmann lost her seat because of it. And I was part of it from behind the scenes, so I knew I was watching my own countrymen stand up and contradict true fact and history by criticizing their colleagues on the floor or in public in press conferences.
We have
You
another
consider-
question here. Did you have a follow-up question? I'll ask you, Lindsay.
You mentioned the violent extremism report that came out, and I believe in that report they said there was no mention at all of Muslim influence. It was primarily the number one target was American patriots. How do we counter that?
Good question. Get a new president.
Well, I'm sure we'll be
That's
working on that.
going to have to be, that's a first and foremost necessity. Under this administration, if it continues, you won't be able to, without putting yourself at much greater risk than the average American is willing or capable of doing. These people are merciless. They have no restraint, or very little, and no regard for due process or constitutional principles for that matter. They're not burdened by the restraint of telling truth or lie. They're concerned about their strategy, and they will do anything, honest or not, legal or not, to accomplish that strategy. including anybody that gets in their way.
Actually, I have a question I'd like to hear your answer on. It came to our attention this last year, around February, March, that there's a corporation down in Newport Beach called Lexipol. And we discovered through a happenstance with the murder of Lavoy Finicum in Burns that these new policies and procedures had come out that our local sheriff's department uses. And in researching that, I discovered that over 5,000 law enforcement agencies throughout the country subscribe to these laws. And I call them laws because it appears to me, and so my question's about the appearance and what we've done here. It appears to me that under the guise of constitutionality, it appears that our Congress has, and the bureaucrats have usurped our constitutional rights by mandating things like the Patriot Act and NDAA and unlimited detention, and that this corporation, Lexipol, with their lawyers, has created policies around that to enforce those things, which take away our due process and take away a lot of our rights. Do you have any knowledge about that? Can you comment on that?
Not per se on the organization, only in the way that it's touched people like me in our particular career, because we were the harbingers. You know, this started in '06, sadly under the Bush administration. The first time I got investigated was in 2006 for writing an article called Green Tide Rising, Hamas Ascends, which is still on the World Wide Web. The CIA turned me in and they accused me of unethical use of classified information. This investigation was in the fall of 2006, 10 years ago. That was one of the 9. The other 8 were under this current administration. But there were, components already in place within the Bush administration. And when the administration changed, they just went full speed into the mode that they're in now. So there's another thing you may or may not know about. A lot of first there's Congress. Their mandate is to what? Pass law. The executive branch is to enforce it, right? So first Congress is supposed to make law. That's the constitutional mandate. But what has this administration done? Executive orders, right? But there's more to it than that. That was the first level of what they did, unilateral decisions through executive order. The next one are directives written by secretaries of the major agencies like mine, Customs and Border Protection, DHS. Jay Johnson wrote the memos that engendered virtually all of the immigration and counterterrorism policies that we see in place today. It came out of my own agency. They sent us the memos and told us that if we didn't comply with it, we would suffer adverse consequences. In other words, we're supposed to violate our vow for the fact of a kind of a submission to the policy. The third level is one that virtually nobody knows about. That's the Federal Register. They drop those rules and regulations into the Federal Register literally in the middle of the night, just like they bring immigrants into small communities almost literally overnight. And one of the most significant ones was February 4th, 2015. They put a provision in the Federal Register that even if you are affiliated with a known terrorist organization, if it's part of your regular cultural activity, you can still get a visa to come to America. So all I'm doing is that there are parallels. You're talking about one spoke of a wheel that's hubbed with this administration. I'm talking about another spoke, but it's actually a part. This approach, these policies have diffused their way through every single segment of our society. And you don't really even know about them until you step on the landmine and then discover that you're in this perilous situation.
I see another hand up over here.
One has to wonder why so many government officials, including the president, are so willfully blind to the Sharia issue and the Muslim issue. I'm wondering, is this a tactic to let Sharia come in as part of a bigger strategy to change? I mean, we've heard about globalization and things like that. Is this a way to disrupt things so that the real globalization can come in and clean up the mess?
There's probably, 3 or 4 interacting components in your question, right? Policies, worldviews, Islamic strategy, progressive leftist strategy, overlaps, cooperation. You know, it would take a while to unravel that all and lay it out on the table. But I'll first go back to the overlying intention to fundamentally alter or abolish this form of government. But then I'll ask, how long has what we conceive of as the progressive leftist Marxist Leninist Red Party existed in the context that we understand it? 100 years, right? How long has Islam existed? 1,400 years, 14 times longer. Who do you think actually has the tactical advantage in this situation? Who's actually playing who here? Islam is playing the progressive leftists, is what, was it Lenin called them? Useful idiots. To create disruption and chaos and anarchy in the society, which allows them to advance into that same society and set up what are called rabat, strongholds. While we're being distracted, they come in and occupy the land, the area. So, the progressives think they're allied with the Islamic movement because they have the same ideology, the same worldview, to abolish or alter or abolish the discriminatory, biased, unfair government and establish it with one that's inclusive and diverse. That's probably one layer of the onion. And then it goes up to the point where it becomes, we have visible elected levels of power, and then it morphs into the invisible levels of power that have no accountability to anybody. And each level you go up gets smaller and smaller in basic concentrated number. And I don't know where we are in that continuum right now, but it seems like we're suffering an inordinate amount of influence from international level organizations like the UN, who is the one that vets the immigrants. But did you know that? Yeah. We don't vet them. Aside from Hillary's assertions last night in the debate that we're going to vigorously vet these people, we don't vet them. The UN does. And we don't know what their criteria are. And then the State Department is involved by issuing them visas. And we don't know what their criteria are either. And then the agency that's supposed to actually protect the border from threat, Customs and Border Protection, that was created in March of 2003, is the last component to see these people rather than the first. I'm not sure if I could really answer your question because it's an intricate, deep one. And I can't explain in words all the ideology and motivation of these people other than to go back to the constitutional premise that they're seeking to alter or abolish this current form of government, which does keep you on safe ground, by the way, because you take arguments, political discussions back to the founding documents, it insulates you from a lot of accusations of bias, racism, and Islamophobia. After all, you're trying to defend the U.S. Constitution, which is definite, defined, and objective, rather than trying to argue about terms that nobody's ever defined. What does inclusive actually mean? What does diverse actually mean? Nobody ever tells us. You only find out when you violate these terms, that you run afoul of the administration.
Yeah, you said the people who were criticized were helping you. The ones who criticized them were McCain, Boehner, and Rogers. Is that McMorris Rogers, or is that someone else?
That was, I don't know, it wasn't, his first name is not Morris. Mike, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
our congressperson is McMorris Rogers.
No,
I just
it
wanted
wasn't
to
him.
clear that up. Also, I thought you talked about reciprocity between agencies and that not happening. You wanted to cure that if you get back there. But I thought the whole purpose, one of the main purposes of Homeland Security was to solve that problem after 9/11.
It was supposed to be. Early we were communicating. FBI would come in and sit with me in interviews. My main specialty as an active duty officer was interviewing potential terrorists. And that's where I learned a lot of the psychological and ideological worldview of these guys, as I talked to them all the time at work. And oftentimes the FBI would come in and sit, but that gradually diminished over time. Once or twice, maybe 3 times, we've tried to form a joint task force right at the airport where I worked, where they would be right there on site and kind of work in a partnership. Not once did that ever get off the ground and ever go anywhere. And the reciprocity problem really is real, because CBP doesn't know what FBI is in any investigation of any individual, and vice versa. We're not sharing the information like we should. We don't even have the same database.
Well, it seemed like, this is the last one, it seemed like Homeland Security happened right after 9/11, and it was, terrorism is kind of morphed from these people who bombed the Twin Towers or flew planes into them, into like Tea Party people, especially in this county. And is that part of a bigger agenda?
Well, would you say that this administration has an agenda?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I watched it change from the pure, simple, original founding mandate to protect our country from threat of terrorism into this complicated, convoluted policy of partnering with Muslim groups and in preventing law enforcement officers from doing their job, and identifying groups like militia, or whatever term you want, right-wing people, as at least equal to, if not greater than, the threat of Islamic terrorism. That's what Southern Poverty, that's what Richard Cohen, that's his driving. Listen to the proceedings. He specifically said, there is no threat from Islam, it's those right-wing people that are really the threat. And everybody on the progressive left says the same thing, and he is one of the driving forces of that whole ideology. He personifies that attitude. It's not Islam at all, says he. It's the people on the right that are the threat. Anybody else?
Well, in that case, I'll ask one more. Who do you think is at the center of the onion?
The center of the onion.
Shrek.
Shrek, did you say?
He's like an onion, you.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, I think we all probably have a pretty fair idea, at least in the visible realm, who is closer to the center of the onion. I think Hillary Clinton's a lot closer to the center of the onion than Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton makes him look like an amateur, in my opinion. She's been around a lot longer. She's got all these ties to all these international level leaders. He's not the same as her, and he will take what he has put in place and go forward with it with the, let's call it, expertise, unlike any that we've ever seen before. Go ahead.
Do you have a feel, when you look at law enforcement officials across the country, whether it be sheriffs or police chiefs or whatever, do you have a feel for how many of them suspect that they're getting wrong information from the federal government versus taking it hook, line, and sinker?
I'm not sure if I could quantify it by percentage, exact percentage, but I can tell you that a significant portion of the law enforcement community knows that there's something very wrong, and that they resent being prevented from doing their job, and that if they were given the opportunity, they would gladly go back to the duties that they took the vow for, and they're waiting and hoping that that day will come. It's a good portion of them.
It's only a small portion, or a hook, line, and sinker by sheriffs or leaders.
Except that those small portion are in positions of leadership and authority. So you really can't quantify it by number. The people at the top are small in number, but they have an inordinate amount of influence on the rest of the law enforcement community.
What is Obama's involvement in Islam and Muslim?
You mean in his life?
in his life? Where is he now? He claims he's not a Muslim.
Well, if you're asking me, is he a Muslim? The other side of the same sentence, I have a snappy answer for that one. I always answer it the same way.
Looks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
Well, not even that. I go to the Godfather Part 3. Robert Duvall, Tom, the lawyer, and Michael Corleone, they're going to do this new project, and he tells Tom, you can't be part of it because you're not part of the family. Remember that? At that point, Tom, the lawyer, had helped them achieve all of their strategic goals. So, did it really matter at that point whether Tom was actually a member of the Cosa Nostra or not? Because he had helped them accomplish what their goals were. And maybe he sees it as ideological partners. You know, they have the same worldview, apparently, according to him, and they have the same goals to recreate a more just, fair, and inclusive and diverse society. I know I'm not being as precise as maybe you hope, but it keeps me safe by giving that kind of an answer. Because if I just came right out and said that he was one, and then I was proven wrong, I'd be wrong. I'd be discredited, wouldn't I? And that's what kept me safe during all the time of my career. I was always careful. If I knew it, I would always say it. But if I didn't know it, I would never say so. And I always had the documentation to answer or back up anything that I did say. Maybe time will tell us as time goes on. Will the real Barack Obama please stand up? Because I think a lot of us are wondering who this guy really is.
Well, he's allowing it all.
That's the point.
Rick?
Rick, did you have something?
Yeah, this house cleaning. Is it even possible to get deep enough with an administration change to bring about a change there?
It all depends. For example, if Mr. Trump asked me tomorrow, Phillip, what would you do if I gave you a position to help fix it? I would start at the big ports, and I would go back and I'd help bring my colleagues back up to speed on the basic components of what it means to be a law enforcement and counterterrorism officer, and teach them how to develop cases all the way from A through Z, how to identify, how to interview, how to put the information in the system, how to follow up with your colleagues and other law enforcement, fix that problem with this break between FBI and CBP, and follow up how to build the cases. I would do that. And if he said, yes, and I will give you all the authority that you need to do it. Because if he wasn't, if he gave me the opportunity to do the job, but didn't give me the authority to go to the port level management and say, we're going to do the class, period. What I'm talking about, the class, is I would give an academic class a week or so. And then I would say, okay, everybody, let's go out and do it. Let's go make some cases, real ones, right off the floor. There's a person right there that's probably part of Tablighi Jamaat. Let's interview him. Find out, what was he doing over in the madrasa in South Africa? What is he doing? Is he studying to become an imam? What mosque does he go to? What is his imam's name in Baltimore? All these pieces of information that we used to be allowed to ask, but now outright, if not prohibited from, then strongly discouraged from doing because of fear of backlash and recrimination either from them or the Department of Justice coming down, and you will suffer adverse consequences for doing it, discrimination, etc. If he would give me the authority to do that, then I would do it. But if he doesn't, then I would basically tell him, sorry, but it doesn't matter what kind of a nice sounding program you start. If you don't give us the authority to go into the port level and tell them we have the authority from the president through whatever, DHS, to do this class, then there's no point in even doing it. We need to be given And that will address your question. Yes, it can be changed. But if you are too concerned about maintaining status quo and not stepping on anybody's toes, then you'll never be able to accomplish it because they will block you. Believe me. Then there's the union. The union would fight it too, because it would cause people that are in different assigned job duties to have to come in and take training that they don't necessarily want to take or care about. So they would have to be allowed to do it. It would have to be a special kind of dispensation. It's possible, but it's really remarkable how much influence management and union working together have. They would rather shut down good programs than have it violate their agreements. So, does that make any sense? It's possible, but it would take some real strong authority from top down to do it.
Last question.
How much do you think Mr. Trump knows of what you've told us here tonight?
Well, a lot of my friends that are in the book or not in the book but are in his inner circle have doing all they can to tell him. I don't know how much is rubbed off because there's not two Mr. Trumps. One that hasn't been counseled who debated Hillary Clinton last night, and one who has been counseled who debated Hillary Clinton last night. Maybe without the influence, it would have been worse or not as effective as whatever level he was last night. So I know there's a lot of good people in his group that are doing all they can to help him, and that's all I can tell you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think you have a book to tell us about?
Oh, the book to tell you about. Oh, there's also this video here called Enemies Within. It's by Trevor Loudon. And his emphasis is kind of like mine, but on what I call the red side of the equation. He's very focused on progressive leftist influence. But then we met at the RNC in Cleveland, and they put me into the movie. See this shady character in the back?
And I will mention that we have had Trevor Loudon here, very impressed, and we did receive the DVD, and I've got to tell you guys, you need to buy it. It's excellent.
So what we did is we fused them together. We hybridized the movie into what I call the green dragon and the red dragon. That's my term for it. And showed how they work together.
How much is that?
$10 for that. And this here, see something, say nothing? There's a foreword in it by Michelle Bachmann. She was the first person that I met in Congress. She was the first person to listen to me. And she wrote the foreword on it. And so did Mr. Gomer. He put something here because he was another person that stood by me the whole time. Louis Gomer from Texas. And anyway, basically what this is a handheld camera like that one back there on my shoulder, walking you through 15 years of history from the time of 9/11 up till the San Bernardino shootings. It's not about me. The book isn't. It's about us and how we went sideways in our counterterrorism. It's basically an open indictment because nothing that I wrote about in the book has been resolved yet to this day. It's like the black box at the crash site. Beep, beep, beep. It's just sitting there. And anybody who goes and analyzes the black box will see why we crashed. And I even offer some remedy in there, hopefully, basically along the lines of the question that I just asked you. I know from personal experiences on a big case that I worked on, I called it the Madrasa Boy case. Madrasa boys are American citizens who went to an IDSO Madrasa, intelligence-driven special operation, in other words, known teacher of jihad, in South Africa, American citizens who went there to become imams. I intercepted the first generation of American sons of immigrants who went there and watched them grow from boys into men. And the last year of this 4 or 5 year process, they tried to pull a fast one. They diverted. Instead of coming from the international flight through Atlanta where I was working, they went to Detroit or Chicago or New York and then took a domestic flight home. What does that tell you? They knew. They didn't want to talk to me. They knew because as time goes on, they're getting further and further into this Salafi world, and that they knew I knew it. But so what happened was when they diverted, it told me more in sense than what they had said when I actually talked to them, because I knew from that behavior that they were talking to each other. But it also just revealed another big gap. My colleagues at these other ports didn't interview them. They didn't have the wherewithal or the skill to recognize that these guys had active cases on them that were 4 and 5 years old. And we call it DTR. They went right down the road. So that would be the gap that I could fix.